Whatto chaps, I'm Magical Mike and I'd like to ask and answer a few questions about the Warrior Elite specialization, the Bladesworn. Hopefully I can explain quickly what it does, how it does that thing, and most importantly how it feels and if it's fun to play. And if you like the video then do please leave a like and consider subscribing, thanks. Also, see how many Final Fantasy VIII references that you can spot, because, you know, Gunblades made me do it. First up, let's see what ArenaNet thinks the Bladesworn is all about, and then I'll take it through some dragon response missions, strikes, and some open world mobs.
Advances in Canthan technology have yielded a fusion of firearm and longsword. The gun saber. Only a dedicated, highly trained warrior can handle such a volatile weapon. Gun saber attacks enhance the Bladesworn's flow, allowing them to use their meditative dragon trigger. In this state of calm and concentration, they can load their gun saber with magically imbued cartridges that power up their attacks. With their gun saber sheathed, they wield offhand pistols to maintain their flow.
Gun saber, flow, dragon trigger, and offhand pistol. Yep, they about summed it up there. But what does it all mean? Well, I'm here to help you find your way around the Bladesworn's kit, so don't be afraid and let's get moving. The Bladesworn feels nothing like any other warrior playstyle, and I'd say the closest thing we've had previously to it would be the Deadeye, but even that doesn't quite take the idea of being immobile as far as this elite specialization does. The Bladesworn opts to root itself and focus up quite often for lengthy periods in order to unleash the extreme dragon slash abilities. You'll also be giving up all of your regular weapon bursts, so no eviscerate or arcing slices while you're running as a Bladesworn. Right, starting up with the Bladesworn's two weapons. First of all, it gets an offhand pistol. Skill 5 has 6 ammo charges and recharges really quickly. It's basically a melee weapon though, which fires at short range. It fires all of its ammo stacks all at once in a flurry of explosions. It does more damage per ammo that you spend and it pushes you backwards slightly. This can feel a little bit weird if you're moving in a direction when you use it, because it'll sort of fight for movement control. It also counts as a movement skill for all the many traits that augment those. Skill 4 is a small advance. It recharges 3 ammo on skill 5 and gives you an Aegis. Again, it's another movement skill. So ideally you want to blast out all 6 shots from skill 5, advance back in with skill 4 to reload, and then blast another skill 5 again to shuffle or boogie around the enemy. Now, you're hardly the man with the machine gun with the offhand pistol, but you do get to blast a moderate amount of shots out fairly quickly. It just didn't feel very important to the Bladesworn's overall kit to me, but it does have its uses, especially having ammo tied to it due to a particular trait that we'll talk about later on. The other weapon that a Bladesworn has under her control is the gun saber. In combat, you can't swap weapons like you regularly would on Core, Berserk or Spellbreaker. Instead, your F1 becomes the ability to draw out your saber, which is a Canthan fusion of greatsword and firearm. You always have access to this weapon as a Bladesworn, and unfortunately, you can't customize how it looks or sheath it while it's equipped. Personally, I'm not a fan of how ridiculously bulky the firearm part of it is, so it's a bit of a shame that we can't change that. I've also seen the draw animation do all sorts of weird things. While the sheath is set on your character's waist, I've seen it drawn from the back, pulled with the sheath still attached to it, completely sideways. I've seen double greatswords attached to it, and all sorts of weird things. But silliness aside, the gun saber is not an actual physical weapon item like every other weapon you get. It acts like an engineer's kit, so it inherits whatever sigils you have equipped on your active weapons. As for the skills though, the weapon itself has to fill a rather flexible role, since it's taking a permanent slot in your kit. The auto-attack chain releases gunshots on the third hit, causing explosions. It feels relatively similar to a regular greatsword, with a few of its attacks too. Skill 5 break step being a lunge forwards, a bit like rush, but you'll force your way the whole distance regardless of your target, giving yourself some fury and another explosion at its origin. Skill 2, blooming fire, is a big payoff explosion melee. Skill 3 is a ranged AoE artillery shell, which is a good opener. And skill 4 is an instant projectile block followed by a melee swipe, much like arcing slice, followed further by a load of shots at enemies that are just outside of melee range. All of these skills are ammunition based too, which is hugely important to getting the most out of them, since they have some lengthy recharges for being regular weapon skills. While the pistol felt a bit lackluster and rather forgettable, the gun saber is integral to the Bladesworn's playstyle, so it's good that I ended up enjoying how the weapon felt. There's something familiar about its greatsword-like skills. It does decent damage and has just fancy enough animations with the gun blasts and explosions to make it feel new, and manages to fill in a couple of basic utility skills too, even though I basically just spam them anyway. With some more thought, I could get a lot more use out of, say, the projectile blocker or break step. Though one thing it is missing is crowd control. The saber has no break bar hitting skills, so it might be a good idea to run with a hammer for situations that call it. Onto utilities, the new ones are called armaments, and honestly are probably the dullest part of the Bladesworn's new capabilities. I did like the heal skill, which heals a tiny amount, then after 5 seconds heals you again for a much chunkier amount. Clearly this is a setup for buying you time during Dragon Trigger, but you can also double cast it to gain some boons too. It's just a solid heal, it has ammo and no frills. Then you have 2 deployable wall skills. One that blocks projectiles, and I found it only really useful to shore up a couple of defences at the Bone Skinner, and another that cripples and immobilises foes that walk through it. Really not particularly interesting at all, again these both use ammunition. And then the stun break of the kit is called Dragon Spike Mine, which is just an evade backwards and it drops a mine on the ground for some reason, and it recharges Dragon Trigger, which is pretty pointless and I never ended up using it. Flow Stabilizer though is easily an always pick skill, since it gives you a ton more resource and the ability to use Dragon Trigger much more quickly. You can also double cast it to gain even more flow too. And the elite skill is a big one that reads so simply: recharge 1 ammo on all skills. Tactical reload is insanely strong when you think about it, because all these utilities, shouts, throw axe, rifle skills, pistol skills, gun saber skills and Dragon Trigger skills all use ammunition. So being able to just pop this elite every 30 seconds and then get instant access to a whole load of new skills to use again is crazy good value. It's actually more often than that too, if you use a certain trait, trust me. So let's finally talk about what the heck flow and charges are, and then what the Dragon Trigger is. Flow is the successor to adrenaline. You don't build it by hitting things, you just generate it over time. Any skill or trait that used to just give adrenaline now either gives a flat amount of flow or a buff that makes it generate faster. This can stack up to 25, but 3 or 4 stacks is already a very quick build-up amount that you'll notice a lot. This is pretty easy to get with just the Flow Stabilizer skill, but you can improve that by all kinds of means. Dragon Trigger is your F2 skill. You can only use this when you have the gun saber out, which is a suggestion that I'd have to improve the feel of this class. Just make F2 available in either weapon set, because you end up spending so much time with only the saber otherwise. Upon entering Dragon Trigger, which you can do with just about any amount of flow, you lock in place and begin rapidly draining your flow to convert it to charges, which are the bullet icons on the UI. If you've enough flow, you can get to 10 charges maximum, and if you've enough positive flow, it is possible to overcome this rapid draining effect. You don't retain those charges if you cancel Dragon Trigger, essentially wasting that flow if you mess up. Interestingly, you can still enter a portal while charging for weird shenanigans, I guess, and so moving or using any utility skill that has an animation cancels this mode, but shouts and instant skills are fine to use. Your first 3 skills in Dragon Trigger are the Bladesworn's new burst abilities, each slightly different. Dragon Slash Force is pure melee and does the most damage. Dragon Slash Boost is a quick dash forwards and through your enemy for slightly less damage, and Reach is a ranged version that does the least. Using any one of these skills consumes all of your charges and does more damage per charge used. It takes 5 seconds max to charge a full power Dragon Slash, but the scaling makes it so worth the wait. I've seen upwards of 400,000 damage on this thing. Yes, 400,000 damage, which is an absolutely bonkers amount from a single hit. Granted, this isn't always easy to pull off, since you have to stand still for that charge time, and that can be harder than you'd think with the amount of crowd control that some enemies have. Finding time to get one of these off against Hydras in particular was tough, but unbelievably satisfying to slice right through 80% of its health, blast all of its heads off instantly, and wipe them all out in a single hit. So cool. Skill 4 and 5 while you're in Dragon Trigger should be able to help you out with getting these fully charged attacks off. Skill 4 gives you a short Aegis, and Skill 5 is a short-ranged Blink, which I kinda wish had a minor animation to be honest. These are also ammo skills too, which is again to note. All of these attacks are an absolute blast to use, though they do have their problems. It's quite easy to move and cancel your own trigger. Standing still for 5 seconds a lot of the time isn't the most engaging gameplay, even if the payoff is worth it. Using them puts your weapon swap on cooldown, forcing you to stay in gun saber after a dragon slash. Reach doesn't track enemies, so they can sidestep it. None of them have any Z-axis collision, meaning that you can just jump over or elevate over these attacks, and the voice lines got extremely annoying in just the short time I spent playing it, especially with one particular build. Let's ride on to traits now. One of the miners give you a whopping 250 ferocity every time you hit with an explosion. Now it doesn't stack, but you can stack up to 10 seconds of that plus 250, and this is very easy to keep on you since so many of your skills have explosions baked in. Make sure to have this active before you hit with a dragon slash too. All the adept traits focus on flow generation. One gives a stack when you heal yourself every 5 seconds, which lines up nicely with the heal skill, or with shout healing, or things like might makes fright to guarantee uptime. One of these traits applies on weapon swap, which counts after a dragon slash, and one of them applies on movement skills, which makes break step on the saber feel more useful among other options, such as the 2 pistol skills you'll get. The master traits interact with ammunition skills. You can get barrier if you spend the last ammo on a skill. You can do a little bit of burning and some extra damage with another one of these traits, which is a terrible pick by the way, since this is not even close to being a condition class. And finally, a trait that lowers all of your skill cooldowns by 1 second when you use their final ammo charge. This is why having so many ammo skills is absolutely nuts, and why the saber has long cooldowns. It's actually because you get so much value out of this trait that it's a no-brainer pick almost every time. This thing, Lush Forest, can make shout healer builds pretty nutty. Finally, the Grand Masters that alter Dragon Slash. The first one heals you for 8% of the damage dealt, which was pretty nice for a resustain after a risky attack, and can trigger the on-heal flow trait. Another good pick was the huge counter to tons of Path of Fire mobs, which made all of your Dragon Slashes unblockable, unblindable, and gave it a stun on top, and this was really super handy to have. The third pick lowers the max charge count of Dragon Trigger to 5 out of 10, but re-enters the mode immediately instead of having a cooldown, allowing you to spam slashes way more often at a significantly reduced damage rate. This was also a very fun pick, but caused some different issues. The great thing about Warrior in general is that you can pick any trait line and make it do something fun with the Bladesworn. Anything that interacted with adrenaline has been adapted for flow and charges. Generators either give a flat flow or a positive flow buff, while spenders like Berserker's Power or Adrenal Health work based on thresholds for charge that you spend. This means that if you want to build a mega defensive Bladesworn with defense and strength trait lines, and then boost it with a million trillion toughness and give it a guaranteed crit on weapon swap with a Sigil of Vision, you're looking at something that can be insanely tanky and still deliver hundreds of thousands of damage without sacrificing anything. If you want to run tactics and do some shout healing support, then the ammo skills are going to benefit loads from Tactical Reload and Lush Forest. One of my builds used arms for the guaranteed crit on bursts without changing any of my sigils. This also helped with Fury uptime and a whole bunch of extra ferocity from Signet Mastery and Lesser Signet of Might. But I think my favourite interactions were from Strength and Discipline. Berserker's Power was easy to keep up since Dragon Slashes happen so often. I suppose you could run Merciless Hammer in case of needing crowd control too, which the whole kit lacks, so you even have options. You'll also get the option of Brave Stride, and the stability can make Flow Stabilizer give the extra flow that it has on both of its charges, which is crazy strong. Discipline is just hard to give up overall on any warrior build. Crackshot isn't even a bad pick if you have a rifle for the extra ammo skills and having a ranged weapon. Again, since you'll camp the gun saber most of the time, it's not even a terrible idea to use the rifle, despite Warhorn being a sneaky little damage boost that you might want to use too. Brawler's Recovery is a handy trait, triggering just before a Dragon Slash hits and can maybe, if you're lucky, cure some blindness. Fast Hands lowers cooldown on Dragon Trigger and swapping back out of the gun saber, but most importantly we have Burst Mastery, which refunds quite a chunk of flow if you use a burst skill, making the use of Dragon Slashes much more common. And since most of your DPS comes from this one-trick skill, it is kind of important. And speaking of one-tricks, the final build that I liked to call the Omni Slash variant involves using Daring Dragon combined with Burst Mastery. The result is a fated circle of attacks where you literally try to spend Dragon Trigger charges as fast as possible, not even opting to charge them up, just to get back into Dragon Trigger mode for another burst skill, using them with one charge as much as possible. I really enjoyed using the Boost Dragon Slash over and over and over again while fighting mobs of regular enemies. It didn't do a lot of damage, but the mobility of slicing through the enemies so many times while they remain in the blasting zone just felt really fun to do. I was able to chain up to 16 Dragon Slashes together at one point with this build. So while the damage was kinda meh, the fun and the theme of the onslaught roughly divided to more fun than the one single hit of Dragon Slash, especially on groups of little enemies. So yes, the Bladesworn is capable of some crazy numbers that we've never seen before in the game, but it's not without its problems. If you want to use the Omni Slash variant, you really need to do so on the salt flats, otherwise you'll find uneven terrain flinging you into the air and the Dragon Trigger being cancelled mid-chain. This was an oddly common problem too, since any uneven surface could send you into the air and ruin a good Dragon Slash. The ranged slash often missed, it's hard to charge a full slash in a crowd control spammed fight, and the voice lines annoyed the absolute heck out of me noticeably quickly. My Norn saying, once more, every time the Omni Slash build went off, and exhaling at maximum volume into my ears after fights like a terrible ASMR startup channel was so irritating. You can also spam the Omni Slash build too quickly, since there's a split second before re-entering Dragon Trigger, meaning that you can cancel your own combo by accidentally using a gun saber skill in between. The charge up time was quite long, but satisfying almost every time. The lack of crowd control sometimes hurt the spec, but more often than not, the damage output would simply ignore dealing with break bars anyway. I'm not keen on having to be in saber mode to then use the trigger. It would be nice to put it on your other weapon set too to allow more weapon swapping. It would also be nice if movement keys didn't work while you were in trigger stance, like kneeling works on a Deadeye. And pistol overall was just okay, but largely forgettable. Apart from these minor gripes, and they are minor, playing a Bladesworn in the blue field of DRMs felt great. It has the tools to smash through trash mobs easily on any of its builds. Against boss mobs, it could absolutely chonk their health bars, if you were able to cleverly time your flicker steps and trigger guards to avoid anything that would end your dragon triggers. Slicing a bunch of Hydra heads off and deleting them all in one slash was, again, so cool. Struggling against the Djinn, but then pulling off a killing blow felt, in my mind, just wonderful. And Warrior in general already has a great kit, and having Dragon Slash on top of all of that made any content I threw at it just breezy. And you can't tell me that it's not fun to land consistent 300k hits on bosses. I took this thing through the Bone Skinner and was able to risk Dragon Slashes even through a moderately movement heavy fight. It was also the only time I got use out of the projectile blocking utility skill, so it's pretty viable just about anywhere as far as I can tell. I think the stage is set for a pretty successful elite spec here, though I am having a horrible premonition that we might just meet enemies in Cantha that can do the same thing to us, so watch out for the possibility of being one-shot by other enemy Bladesworn. I should also mention that the damage is mega nerfed in PvP, like not worth it at all, but watch this space because it likely won't stay that way. 5 seconds of standing still being attacked in PvP for a 6k hit? Ooh, not worth it. I can see that being changed. The simple reason to play this is to hit those huge numbers. It's pretty much all in on Dragon Slashes. It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. Spellbreaker is a more punish-oriented warrior, Berserker is an all-out offense, and Bladesworn is about picking just the right window of time to get that finisher off, and then walking out of that battle heroically. Bladesworns don't need to be fast. They don't need to hit you a lot. Just one is all it takes.